Chapter 1.
Load file A15/x/23/2/2/2154. Setup. Run 35660.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, said Miles and Gatto, turning away from the group assembled amongst the cleared chairs and tables of the Belial base refectory. Section leaders to meet me in conference room 1 in 10 minutes, he added, and walked away.
Stop. Set linguistic analysis on. Set syntax full. Set context full. Set motivational analysis on. Set subroutines Freud, Jung, Adler, Skinner. Rerun 35660.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, said Miles and Gatto, his voice catching slightly as he turned away from the simularity projector in the center of the room. The rest of the small group assembled amongst the cleared chairs and tables of the Belial base refectory stood transfixed by the replayed sight of Paula and Gatto's last moments, recorded by a remote drone which had followed her down into Lucifer's poisonous atmosphere. The drone had been too light and too slow to do anything but observe, transmit, and finally be destroyed itself. As the tumbling figure grew a glowing tail of debris, then broke up into a shower of sparks, only Piper O'Rourke thought to put her hand on Miles and Gatto's shoulder. He patted it absently. In the glare of his daughter's death, the tears which explored the creases and folds of his face glistened like comets. Section leaders to meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes, he murmured, and walked away. Piper let her hand fall as her eyes lingered on Miles's back. The door to the refectory clunked into place behind him. Glances were exchanged all around the room.
Stop. Set point of view Piper O'Rourke. Set style 20. Set interpolation on. Options. A. List all emotional responses. B. Prioritize emotional responses. B. Sorting. Prioritize and list most probable response. OK. Rerun 35660.1.
Section leaders to meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes, Miles added sharply before shrugging off the woman's comforting touch and leaving the refectory. Piper let her hand fall as her eyes lingered on the tall, balding figure in the severely tailored turquoise tunic. He was a proud man, one who perhaps overvalued dignity and restraint, but essentially a good man. Too good for her, perhaps. Piper glanced around at the other members of the team who had turned out to mourn Paula and show support for her father. Practically the whole research staff was crammed into the circular refectory, one of the few human-built rooms on the base capable of holding that many people. The only absentees were those on duty down on Moloch, together with Frederic Moshrabban and the 3 newcomers. Of the remaining 25 people, none were speaking, but then words were unnecessary. Everyone had their own way of coping with this, the project's first death since its inception 5 years ago. After watching 1 or 2 of her own support technicians begin to move the chairs and tables half-heartedly back into position for the evening meal, Piper wandered listlessly over to one of the windows which encircled the refectory. The windows had been a concession, won by Christine Lafayette from Earth Government. Piper had sometimes wondered whether it had been the financial investment of Christine's mother in the project which had spoken louder than her words. Whatever the reason, the site for the social center of the base was as near perfect as it was possible to get. Positioned atop the base's central dome, the refectory commanded a perfect view both of the airless dark side of the moon and of the edge of Lucifer, the huge planet it orbited around. Lucifer's lurid atmospheric glow circled the horizon in a ring, broken only by the irregular towers of the mountain ranges, the rock shaped by an abrasive atmosphere long since torn away. The ring of Lucifer, as it had become known, cast a flat scarlet glare across the outlying regions of the base, and threw everyone's shadow towards the center of the room. One or two of the staff considered this sight somewhat morbid, but Christine had insisted that the base personnel needed to be able to look out on a real landscape once in a while, not a similarity of one generated by a neural net. That was fine in theory, but gazing over the fantastic and disturbing landscape of Belial, Piper came close to admitting she would have preferred the similarity. But you couldn't see reflections in a similarity, could you? You couldn't watch everyone in the room without being watched yourself. Over the far side of the refectory, Sam Russell, a middle-aged engineer in a padded foil suit, reached out to his wife Cheryl's hand as she sobbed inconsolably. Alex Bannon sneered as he walked past them, his ornate robes giving him the look of some sweaty Buddha. Only the diminutive, dark-haired Christine Lafayette was actively studying everyone else in the room. But Piper thought, as the chief psychologist responsible for the mental health of the team, that was her job. Piper turned away. She felt distanced from their grief, cold and unreachable. She'd left Earth to escape a world disintegrating into a crazy mess of restrictions, paranoia, and self-destruction. For a while, she had really thought she'd made it. The similarity of Lucifer's turbulent cloud patterns flickered off just as Paula's last burning fragments, having used up the scant supply of oxygen from her suit, sputtered and died. Piper jerked herself out of her reverie with an effort. The nightmare view of Lucifer was replaced by a standard picture, a translucent view of Belial Base itself, with the main corridors and chambers shining pinkly inside it, like the organs of some gelatinous alien life form. People began to move, drifting almost aimlessly around the refectory, as if unsure what to do now the service was over. Piper sighed. Her gaze traveled from the reflection of the room to her own image. Critically, she began to tug at the puffy sleeves and complicated thongs of her tunic, but her practiced grooming motions died away as her gaze caught first upon the sapphire that had been surgically implanted on her left ring finger, and then on the blue veins which snaked across the backs of both hands. She straightened and did something which she usually avoided, looked at her face. Getting old was a funny thing. Paula never made it past her 18th birthday, but Piper would probably hit 110 before senility started to creep in. More if she was careful. She certainly didn't intend to waste her life. She had plans for after Eden. Piper caught a cold glint in her reflection's eye. Age is making you hard, she thought. You've got too many years behind you. Too many memories and regrets clogging up your mind. They're young. Death doesn't touch them the way it touches you. It's not breathing down their necks yet. She pulled her gaze away from the familiar stranger that was her reflection, and looked over to where Alex Bannon and Christine Lafayette were continuing their argument, which had already flourished for years and seemed likely to go on forever. Look, it's obvious, right? All you've got to do is ask your mother for more financial support. That way the Eden Project gets a new lease of life, and maybe we all end up winners. I've told you before, Alex. Mother and I don't talk. Ever. The faintest of French accents gently smoothed her vowels into soft shapes. Even though she bought you a place on the staff? Christine's voice became icy cold. Are you questioning my professional ability? Some people might think that merits a psychological checkup, and that you could get sent back to Earth. Bannon turned away in sudden embarrassment. Normally the technical services supervisor was too fat, too loud, and just too much altogether. Piper had no time for him, or his affectation of importance, so much larger in his own mind than in anyone else's when the mission began, and running dangerously out of control now. But then, sometimes, almost for no reason, the scientist would become like this. Embarrassed, lonely, lacking in any of the social graces. At times like these, Piper was tempted to feel sorry for him, but Bannon himself stifled any overtures of friendship. Piper had learned a long time ago that he couldn't handle them, and had stopped worrying about him. Now she simply found him irritating. "You heard what Miles said," she snapped, her harshness a deliberate attempt to shock them out of their argument. "Alex, Christine, let's go. The man's going to want answers, and he's going to want them soon." Standing petulantly by the food dispenser, which of late had developed a tendency to drift around the refectory in search of customers, Bannon spoke. "And how the hell are we supposed to do that without any properly financed?" Piper sighed. "Alex, life's too short to listen to your whining." Christine rubbed her eyes tiredly. "I'll go along with that." Bannon's face fell. "Hey, look. We've all got our own ways of dealing with the situation, right? Yeah, well, just show a little common sense in what you say, Alex, or we might suddenly find Earth pulling the rug out from under us," Piper pointed out. "If that happens, we're all on a long fall to nowhere." "And Paula thought we were so close," Christine murmured. "So close." Bannon spread his hands placatingly. "Look, we're all fighting over the same pot of gold." He turned to Piper and smiled in unconvincing friendship. "Perhaps you can make her see reason. If we can't get more funding from somewhere, then the obvious thing to do is switch resources from Lafayette's area to mine. It's the only sensible thing to do. I mean, it's been 5 years and we're still not sure the angels even know we exist." Christine sighed. "I just don't want to argue with you anymore, Alex." "This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion," Piper said. "For God's sake, can't you both show a little respect?" Bannon could not resist trying to get the last word. "I'll bring it up at the meeting," he said. "And if Ngado can't see the way ahead, I'm sure Moshe Rabban and the Energy Police can make him see the error of his ways. Earth Central can't afford to keep pumping money into the project for no return." His face darkened. "Nobody said we had jobs for life." "Great," Piper breathed a sigh of relief. "Now that we've got all that off our chests, let's stop behaving like juvenile similarities and give Miles the support he needs." Piper turned on her heel and began to walk towards the exit. After a sympathetic look at Bannon, Christine turned to follow. As the two women left the gallery, Bannon's face twisted into an irritated snarl. He smashed his fist into the similarity of the base, and gained absolutely no satisfaction at all when his arm passed harmlessly through the field.
"Run on 20.
The conference room was a small, enclosed space with neutral decoration and no windows to distract from its most important function, the exchange of information. Piper took her seat, opposite Miles and Ngado, thinking, as usual, how bare and characterless the room was. It was the one location on the base where she felt truly uncomfortable. For a moment, as she sat, Miles caught her eye. Just for a moment. It was an exchange none of the others noticed, but that didn't surprise Piper in the least. Miles seemed ready to speak. The room fell silent. "The first thing I would like to say is thank you for all your support from both of us. As you know, Paula was very dear to me, the more so after her mother's death, and I would very much like to express—" Miles's words seemed to jam in his throat. "My great sorrow." Christine's eyes widened in concern. "I move that this meeting be adjourned for 24 hours. Bannon spoke up. "I object. If you'll forgive me, Coordinator. I know this is a trying time for you, but we have to find an explanation for the suit failure. We have a 5-person first contact team at the other end of the bridge. Those people need our support. We can't risk any malfunction being repeated. The men and women on Moloch rely on us, and their work is of paramount importance to the mission. We can't let them down." Piper felt like hitting the man. Bannon cared little for the safety of the mission, and not at all about Miles and Ngado's feelings. All he wanted was more money for his research, and that meant keeping the meeting going, despite Christine's attempts to curtail it. "Alex, Christine." Miles's voice was completely under control. Our initial responsibility is to the mission. However, there is an agenda for this meeting, and I think we should adhere to it. We will discuss possible causes of my daughter's death, accidental or otherwise, under the heading of any other business. Piper favored Miles with a direct stare. She wished she could reach out and help this proud man, ease his pain. Miles was precise and intelligent, and rarely showed any of his feelings. Although Christine, not she, was the psychologist, Piper could still tell how close to cracking Miles and Gatto was. It provoked a feeling within her that she thought had died with her husband. So, the coordinator continued, if there are no objections, I shall declare this meeting open. The minutes of the meeting will be abstracted from the neural network similarity records at a later date. He glanced up at a tiny drone, no bigger than a twisted loop of silver tape, bobbing silently in the corner of the room. Now, he continued, stroking the surface of the table before him, the first item on the agenda is the exploration of the aboriginal areas, both here on Belial and down on the bridge on Moloch. As his fingers moved, images appeared in bright primary colors, floating above the surface of the table. Piper, since this is your area, perhaps you would care to begin. No sweat. Piper's fingers caressed the touch-sensitive surface of the table. Pictures appeared in time with her movements, a real-time similarity of the huge gas giant Lucifer with its string of attendant moons. Astarte, Belial, Moloch, and Demogorgon. There hasn't been a lot of progress since the last team leaders meeting. The similarity suddenly expanded to isolate a section of Lucifer's outer atmosphere. Above it, the two moons, Belial and Moloch, swung in geosynchronous orbit, one above the other, linked by the glittering neon thread of the bridge. To Piper, they resembled nothing so much as a dumbbell with unequal weights slowly tumbling through the void. Exploration of the chambers placed throughout the two moons and of the bridge which connects them has so far been proceeding slowly, and without much success, she continued. Apart from the operations of the bridge itself, which Tew Heimdall worked out 2 years ago, the functions of most of the other sites within the moon system remain unclear. Despite everyone's unstinting efforts, we still know nothing more about the aliens who built the complex than we did when we arrived. We don't even know if the angels built it, or whether we're looking for a race who have since moved on. Sure, we found artifacts, hundreds of them. Alex's staff are busy cataloging them even as we speak. But as to what they are, Piper shrugged. Well, even the neural net can't seem to help us. Take this, for example. She pulled something from a receptacle and held it up for general viewing. Jesus found this in the dead space this morning. Is it a pen, a fork, or a work of art? Analysis tells us it's made of high-grade tensile steel. But, Piper bent and folded the device easily, like cloth. You see? She passed the device to Christine. Perhaps the sociologists can make something of it. I can't. Christine took the object and examined it curiously, unfolding and folding it again several times. These things never cease to fascinate me, she said. Their expertise in memory metals was certainly phenomenal. It must have led to a whole new way of thinking, a looser, more unstructured, more abstract philosophy. Alex Bannon snorted. Psycho-babble, he said, smiling as Christine flinched. Piper's fingers made small, circular motions on the table, and the picture zoomed in again to show the two moons in more detail, locked into synchronous orbit. Belial Base, on the upper moon, was marked as a blue nest of tunnels on the side furthest from Lucifer. From it, the single orange tunnel known colloquially as the Pit passed completely through the entire moon, terminating in a small orange blob on the other side. From there, an orange line joined it to Moloch, the lower moon. Apart from a green outline, Moloch's interior was colored completely in orange. The twin moons, one solid, one hollow, continued their orbit, linked along an axis that, if extended, would join the centers of both moons to that of Lucifer itself. Another brush of the fingers. New tunnels appeared, marked in red. In the last 2 weeks, we've opened up a new system of galleries. Preliminary geodating places them at between 500 and 1,000 million years old. There's no atmosphere in there yet, so Cheryl and Sam Russell are trying to seal them and get an oxygen generator set up. She paused. Strange that they'd fill the whole interior of Moloch with air and vegetation and a few hundred tunnels here on Belial with nothing but machinery. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as one more insoluble mystery. And that's it. The rest you know. Busy little critters, weren't they? Offered Bannon, digging their tunnels and building their machines while our remote ancestors were still working out how to divide one cell into two. Not so remote in your case, Christine murmured, just loud enough for Bannon to hear. We're no closer to finding out how the two moons are kept locked in their geosynchronous orbit, Piper continued. I'm no astrophysicist, and I'm sure Alex will correct me if I'm wrong, but Moloch should be orbiting much faster than Belial, because it's closer to Lucifer. Somehow, it's being held back. By the bridge? Christine said. Bannon smirked at her. We've gone over the mechanism with a fine-tooth comb. The equipment that locks each end in place is very sophisticated. Bloody weird, in fact. But the bridge itself is just an extruded monofilament woven into a tubular shaft. Nothing more sophisticated than a basic elevator. At the levels of tension those moons are generating, that bridge should snap like a piece of old knicker elastic. What about Moloch's hollowness? Piper asked. Could the unusually low density be, I don't know, holding it back or something? Don't be stupid, Bannon sneered. Leave the science to me, dear. There was a momentary, embarrassed silence as all four of them looked at the similarity in the center of the table. A small green ring could just be made out, sliding up the bridge like a donut on a string. That would be the lift containing B-shift, Piper decided, making their way back from Moloch to Belial, and a well-earned rest. As head of support services, it was one of her jobs to organize the shifts around the seemingly random meanderings of the lift. Sometimes it seemed that any time not taken up with designing, redesigning, streamlining, adjusting, and rotating duty rosters for the project staff was spent generating similarities of the lift and trying to work out if there was any systematic basis for its movements, or whether it just shifted between Belial and Moloch on a whim and a prayer. So far, only Tew Heimdall seemed to have the faintest idea how and why the bridge worked. The trouble with Tew was, well, he was just Tew, and that was that. As her thoughts gradually drifted back towards reality, Piper became aware that Bannon was still talking. We're beginning to suspect, Bannon was saying, that it's friction between Moloch and Lucifer's atmosphere that is slowing it down. We know that the moon is actually orbiting within Lucifer's atmospheric envelope, and its surface is markedly hotter than Belial's. Problem is, this raises more questions than it answers. If Moloch was subject to any degree of friction, however slight, over the length of time we are considering here, that friction would have eroded the damn thing right away. And there's still the obvious question to be addressed. Both the moons and the bridge orbit well within Lucifer's Roche limit. So why weren't they reduced to rubble aeons ago? Christine looked slightly puzzled. Bannon caught the expression. I know you're not an astronomer, Christine, but by all that's sensible, do your homework, he snapped. No moon can exist within a certain distance of its parent planet without breaking apart due to gravitational stress. Moloch does. The implication is that the builders of these installations, whoever or whatever they were, physically moved Moloch to where they wanted it, and then protected it for millennia from a basic law of nature. There was a longer silence as the four of them took in the significance of Bannon's remark. Piper watched Christine shrink back into her seat. And we're trespassing on their territory, Piper said finally, borrowing their bases for our own purposes. What happens if they come back? We apologize, said Bannon in a dry monotone. Thank you, said Miles and Gatto, when it became clear that Piper had finished her report. She tried to catch his eye, but he either didn't see or wasn't going to respond. The coordinator presented an impression of outward complacency. Piper wondered what emotions lay in wait beneath his calm exterior. Christine, he continued, perhaps you could bring us up to speed on the next agenda item, the attempt to communicate with the angels. The French psychologist drew a breath. Well, that's not a problem. I can sum it up in 2 words. Total failure. Would you care to expand on that? There's not a lot to expand on. The original 1-year program of communications packages backed up with translation software and psychological interpretation washed out because the angels shy away from any form of mechanical device. Anticipating the next question, she added, We still have no idea why. As far as I'm concerned, there aren't many options left to explore. Our best idea for the past few months was to send Paula down in a shielded star pod to try and raise some sort of interest from the angels, but for reasons I can't pretend to understand, she jumped the gun and tried to make a go of it in an ordinary starsuit, with predictable results. She saw the pain in Miles's eyes and flinched. Sorry, Miles. Clumsy of me. Understood, said the coordinator, and gestured for her to continue. Progress on the artificial ecology program can be best detailed by Alex and his pet scientist, Christine said, waving dismissively at Bannon. After all, it's their baby. She sighed. Basically, the bottom line is, after 5 years, we still have no solid evidence that the angels even know we're here. Piper grinned. I'll hang up an ideas box. I've got one straight away, Bannon said. Quit messing about and assign more money to the hard sciences. Christine leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. You think you can accomplish more with spanners and scalpels than I can with the sensible application of proven psychological theory? Sounds more like you need the application of a large dose of common sense to me, Bannon snapped. If you can't get the angels to talk to you, then I'll breed you some that will. I have 17 domefuls of artificial environment out there whose subroutines need careful adjustment if they're to be of any use. His fingers stabbed the tabletop, bringing to life a number of small blue dots scattered around the outlying regions of the base. I've recreated the planetary atmosphere in these domes. If Christine could overcome her reluctance to capture and dissect one of those creatures and provide me with a cell sample, I could be cloning and redeveloping angel life forms in a controlled ecology before you could say Jack Daniels. Miles and Gatto rapped the table with his knuckles. I take it you wish to begin your report now, Alex. So far it's the only one to have yielded any results, Bannon snapped. That's true, Alex, said Piper, but we all know that your experiments aren't long-term. You won't miss any vital information if you don't seed your precious arcs for another 6 months or a year. Wait until the funds are rotated to your department. Not everything has to be done in 7 days, you know. Bannon's fist crashed into the table. The singularity flickered, colors strobing across its surface. Every time we have these meetings, I hear the same line of crap, he said harshly. Nobody's got the guts to terminate the unproductive research and channel the money to where it's needed. Miles quelled Bannon with a glance. I asked for a scientific report, not a shouting match. Please try to be more professional in your approach to the meeting. Nothing can be achieved with this attitude. Bannon looked sullen. Yeah, right. Please continue, then. I don't have anything to add on this subject. Miles sighed. Then what about your main functions here? The analysis of the potential of this planet as a source of energy. You know the answer as well as I do. You've seen my analyses. I suspect that all the super-heavy elements of this periodic table are here in abundance. They must be used to power the Lift and Moloch's interior sun. But we need the angels to tell us where and how they're produced and stabilized, and to help us obtain samples. We have to communicate with them. Piper looked around. Nobody seemed to want to add anything to Bannon's comments. Miles took a deep breath. Very well. In that case, we will proceed to the last item on the agenda. Any other business?
Objection!
Bannon spoke the word as if he had been rehearsing it.
We haven't finished discussing the reallocation of funds from social to technical.
Objection overruled, said Miles calmly. There will be no reallocation. Despite the setbacks, I'm happy with the status quo. Bannon's self-satisfied expression vanished like a burst soap bubble.
I'll take this to Moshe Rabban, he said, a whine creeping into his voice. She'll see things my way. She'll see how you're all just protecting your own interests.
You do that, said Christine, a knowing smile crossing her face.
Just be sure she doesn't think that your area deserves cutting more than mine.
Miles continued over Bannon's protestations. Before I close this meeting, he announced, I wish to make a statement. Paula's death has... well, it has hit me hard. Getting through the next few days will not be easy for me. I will need all of you behind me. His voice softened, and he met all of their eyes in turn. I would like to thank you all for your help so far. Christine, Alex. Was it her imagination, or did his voice soften further, gain warmth? Piper. Thank you. They all straightened in their seats and murmured embarrassed nothings. Piper was surprised to see even Bannon blush. But, and Miles's voice was harsher now, I'm sure it's occurred to all of you that there are 4 possible explanations for Paula's death. The first is a technical malfunction on the suit itself. The second is carelessness on Paula's part. The third is some sort of action by the angels, which implies that they might be more aware of us than we had thought. The fourth is Lucifer itself, an unexpected quirk of the planet or its atmosphere that caught Paula unawares. He looked around the table. The matter requires investigation. I have therefore summoned an adjudicator from Ponten 6. He let the resultant uproar run its course for a minute before thumping the table and calling for quiet. The globes of the moons dissolved into a crazy patchwork of multicolored rhomboids as the singularity projector was disturbed. You've just proved my point, he said as soon as it seemed his voice would be heard. We are all too close to the situation. If it was a technical problem with the suit which resulted in Paula's death, that falls to you, Piper, since it is the responsibility of technical support services to maintain the suits. Piper felt the blood drain from her face. You can't... Let me speak. If it was a personal fault, that's either down to the base psychiatrists, and that means you, Christine, or Paula's family. He looked down at the table. And that means me. Christine chose not to respond to the potential accusation. Piper couldn't let the matter drop so easily. Look, we don't need any adjudicator to... Miles lifted his eyes to stare her down. There was so much anguish in those eyes. She found it hard to believe anyone could hold it all in without going mad. If it was the angels who were responsible, well, that's down to you as well, Christine, for not anticipating the possibility that they might turn against us. And if it was a climactic problem, an electrical storm or turbulence, you, Alex, assured us that Paula would be safe. Piper kept silent as the protests rose again. Of course, it's possible it could be Paula's. Miles's voice cracked. Paula's... He was unable to finish the sentence. A moment passed in silence. He stood up. Please understand that I'm not trying to assign blame. I'm trying to indicate that we all have something at stake. We need an independent outsider to investigate the circumstances of Paula's death, to sift through the facts, and decide which explanation is the correct one. An adjudicator is completely independent. The profound silence that filled the room was broken by a bashful cough.
Excuse me, said a quiet voice, but you seem to have forgotten the 5th possibility.
Miles and Gatto turned to look at the man who stood by the door. "And what's that?" he queried. "Murder," said the doctor.
Stop. Load current file. Subject the Doctor. No record in base personnel. Recheck personnel records. Subject the Doctor. Confirmed. No record in base personnel. Search for first appearance the Doctor. Searching. First appearance of the Doctor. File A151/X/19/11/2154.